Imagine a town that's famous for Halloween. Every year, people travel from all over for its massive parade, wearing whatever handmade costume they can dream up. The more creative, the better. Many people start planning their costumes months in advance. One year, a popular costume designer organizes a group costume. She picks Spider-Man, and everyone who chooses to participate dresses as their own version of Spider-Man. And it's a hit. So the next year, she chooses another superhero, and everyone who wants to join makes their version of that superhero. It becomes an annual tradition, and it grows every year. At first, it's just one recognizable group within a much larger parade. But as the tradition grows, you start to see that superhero throughout the crowd. There are still plenty of unique costumes, but that one character keeps repeating. And it starts to change the way the parade looks and feels. Eventually, newcomers to the parade see the same superhero over and over, and they assume that it must be the town's official costume. Now, there is nothing wrong with a big group of people deciding to dress as Spider-Man together. But if you remember a time where you used to walk through the streets of that Halloween parade full of surprising individual costumes, the kinds that made you tap someone on the shoulder and say, "Oh my goodness, how did you make that?" You may miss a time when Halloween felt that way. That doesn't mean you hate Spider-Man. It means something changed. And that's almost exactly what happened with the Rhinebeck sweater. This video started with a real conversation. A few weeks ago, I was talking with a group of knitters about what we were all making for Rhinebeck when I realized that several of them believed there was an officially designated Rhinebeck sweater, the pattern of the festival. There isn't. You can wear whatever you want to Rhinebeck. An old favorite, a crochet dress, even a store-bought sweatshirt. But the fact that they genuinely believed otherwise told me that somewhere along the way, the meaning of the Rhinebeck sweater has changed. So how did your Rhinebeck sweater become the Rhinebeck sweater? Before we talk about the Rhinebeck sweater, we have to talk about what Rhinebeck actually is. And when knitters say they're going to Rhinebeck, they're usually talking about the New York State Sheep and Wool Festival, which occurs on the third full weekend of every October at the Dutchess County Fairgrounds. The festival started in 1980 as a bread use sale organized by local shepherds, basically a small agricultural event. And you can still find events like these across the Northeast, like New Jersey Sheep and Wool, Connecticut Sheep and Wool, where you find farmers showing sheep, 4-H competitions, sheep shearing and sheepdog demonstrations and fleece sales. And Rhinebeck still has all of that, but it's become something much bigger. Over the past few decades, Rhinebeck has grown into one of the largest and most culturally significant events in the knitting world. Tens of thousands of people travel from across the country, across the world, to come and visit and turn Rhinebeck, New York into the knitting world's biggest convention center. And I don't think this happened by accident. Rhinebeck's popularity grew in parallel with the knitting internet. In the early to mid-2000s, knitters were starting to connect online through blogs and message boards and Yahoo groups. And when you were building friendships in this online sphere, eventually you were going to want to try and meet in person. Rhinebeck is within traveling distance of New York City, Boston, Philadelphia. It's central to most of the Northeast. It's an already established festival, and it has a fiber theme. It just made sense. Rhinebeck became the place to meet your favorite yarn dyers and designers, your favorite podcasters and bloggers, and the knitting friends you made online but had never met in person. And that changed both the scale and the meaning of the festival. As more knitters came, more vendors wanted to be there. And today, multiple independent festivals and marketplaces have popped up in the days leading up to the main event to give even more vendors access to the Rhinebeck crowds. And somewhere along the way, a tradition started. If you were going to be traveling all this way to be surrounded by other knitters, you wanted to wear something worth showing off. What are you wearing to Rhinebeck became its own kind of planning. You would pick out your sweater months ahead of time, work your way up to the festival, hoping to have something really special done in time, and blogs would fill with panicked posts of sweater sleeves finished just days in time, of button bands put on the night before in the hotel room, of sweaters being blocked with just hours to spare and praying that things would dry in time. This isn't because anybody was forced to make a special sweater for Rhinebeck, but it was because it was maybe the one weekend a year where everyone around you just got it. You could wear a handmade sweater to the office and maybe someone would tell you it's pretty, but you wear a handmade sweater to Rhinebeck and everyone around you really understands what that entails. Someone might come up to you and say, "What's that pattern? What yarn did you use? Did you modify that button band? How did you do it?" The sweater itself becomes a conversation starter. That was your Rhinebeck sweater. Not the Rhinebeck sweater, yours. When you look at photos from Rhinebeck in the early 2000s and 2010s, you don't see one pattern that stands out. What stands out is the variety. Hand-spun yarn, cables, lace, bright color work, Technicolor dream coats made out of Noro. Whether you were wearing something you had knit a long time ago or made something new for the festival, everyone was wearing something different. When I first attended the festival around 2010, variety didn't feel like part of the experience. It was the experience. It felt like you could walk around all day and never see the same pattern twice. Every few feet you were seeing a new design, a new colorway, a new technique. It was visually overwhelming, but in the best possible way. And you left the weekend with so much inspiration of new patterns, new techniques, new ideas you wanted to try. What connected us wasn't that we made the same sweater, it was that we were knitters. And knitters made different things. The shared experience was making something special for Rhinebeck. And whatever that sweater was personal to you. Now that doesn't mean there weren't trendy patterns. There absolutely were. You would see a pattern pop off on Knitty and then you would see many versions of it across the festival. But there was never one pattern that became the visually dominant center of the festival. The common denominator was knitting, not one particular thing that everyone had chosen to knit. Choosing what to wear was only one way that knitters expressed who they were. To understand how they found each other at the festival, we have to look at where many of them met for the first time, online. The early knitting internet looked nothing like the internet we have now. It was scattered across personal blogs, Yahoo groups, podcasts, which at the time were audio only, and it wasn't the same algorithm-driven landscape we have where you might be delivered a video and never see that creator again. Most of the early knitting internet wasn't divided into creators and audiences like it is today. People would follow each other's blogs. They would comment on project progress over weeks and months. They would feel like they were really getting to know each other. Now, that doesn't mean that parasocial relationships didn't exist. The Yarn Harlot was a true celebrity. I remember standing behind her in line at Rhinebeck and feeling like I had a true celebrity sighting. But that wasn't the dominant structure of the community. The relationships weren't always perfectly equal, but they were often reciprocal. Today, we see thousands of knitters following one creator, and in the early knitting internet, we saw knitters following each other. And once you feel like you know someone, you might want to meet them. Organizing 50 different people across 50 different blogs across one weekend in October is a challenge on its own. For that, the knitting internet needed something more centralized, and in 2007, it got it. Ravelry. Part pattern database, part notebook, part forum, Ravelry created a central place for the entire knitting internet to congregate. And then everybody went to Rhinebeck. And Ravelry didn't leave knitters to wander around the festival hoping to recognize someone from a tiny profile picture. They organized a central meetup from noon to 1 on the hill on Saturday and Sunday. And this wasn't a series of separate gatherings for separate types of knitters. Everyone showed up at the same place at once. Famous designers and yarn dyers, podcasters and listeners, knitters who had never attended Rhinebeck before, and those who had been coming for decades. Everyone came to the same spot at the same time. It was a hodgepodge in the best possible sense, and people weren't there because they were gathering around one designer or one yarn brand. Everyone was just there because they loved knitting. They wanted to meet other people who loved knitting too. And at least from where I stood, it felt remarkably unstratified. There wasn't a red rope separating off the famous designers or everyone else couldn't enter. You might be standing shoulder to shoulder with YSOLDA TEAGUE or Mary Jane Mucklestone, or you might say hi to Jess from Ravelry, and you might similarly just ask somebody what their sweater is or ask a stranger what yarn they bought that morning. That doesn't mean status disappeared. People still got starstruck. People still wanted to have their celebrity sightings. But for that one moment, everyone just gathered together on that one hill. Ravelry handed out buttons with Sharpies so you could write your Ravelry ID, which allowed you to identify someone you might have known online but not known what they looked like in person. And the identifier was these little pins. So everyone could wear a different sweater and still identify as part of the group. Over time, the main meetup became an anchor for smaller meetups surrounding it. In the 2009 recap, Ravelry explained that podcasters, designers, and yarn dyers had smaller, separate meetups that spun off from the main meetup on the hill. And this all began in a relatively analog era. Smartphones existed, but they weren't universal yet, so you couldn't follow someone's Instagram story to figure out what barn they were in or try and live track location to meet up at some central place. You needed a very simple instruction: the hill at noon. It felt like a high school cafeteria where everyone shares one lunch period. The Ravelry meetup created a collective community by putting everyone wearing everything together on that hill. Now, we actually have a pretty clear snapshot of what the Rhinebeck sweater meant in this era, because in 2013, YSOLDA TEAGUE published a book called The Rhinebeck Sweater. And you might think, based on the title, that she's pointing you toward a specific design. But she isn't. The book doesn't contain one Rhinebeck sweater. It contains 12. YSOLDA gathered 11 of her knitting designer friends and gave them all the same prompt: design the sweater that you would want to wear to Rhinebeck. The whole thing was photographed on location at the festival with the designers themselves wearing their sweaters. Each design spotlighted yarn that could be purchased from a vendor at the festival. But what I think is very telling about this collection is the variety. Each sweater looks completely different, from lace to cables to color work. Each designer had a completely different take on what the Rhinebeck sweater could mean. Even when the Rhinebeck sweater shows up in the title of an actual book, it's not pointing to a specific design. It's pointing to a category. The shared part is Rhinebeck itself, the deadline, the place, and an audience of knitters who really understand. And each sweater was a designer's answer to that shared experience. Now, this doesn't mean that coordinated Rhinebeck knitting never happened. It actually did. But when a group would coordinate a sweater together, it usually indicated something a little bit different. Some groups of knitters would choose one pattern, and each would knit it out of a different color. When they stood together at Rhinebeck for a group photo, their sweaters created a rainbow. And in a festival with tens of thousands of people, coordinating a sweater design made that group visible to others and to itself. But these rainbows usually grew out of a group that already existed. A circle of friends, a Ravelry group, an online forum that had been in action for years. In most cases, the sweater isn't what initially created the community. It just made an already existing community visible. And then 2020 happened. The in-person festival was canceled that year, along with basically every other in-person event that fall. The festival moved online. There were virtual breed talks and demonstrations and lectures, but that physical gathering of knitters, the connection on the hill, it didn't exist that year. Something else changed that year too, and it matters a lot for the story. In June 2020, Ravelry rolled out a complete redesign. Almost immediately, users began reporting a wide range of physical symptoms that they attributed to the new design, including eye strain, vertigo, migraines, and even seizures. Ravelry acknowledged that although the redesign improved readability for some, it made the site difficult or impossible to use for others. Exactly what caused these symptoms was disputed, and for this case, the medical pathology matters less than the cultural impact. Users and designers pushed Ravelry to address the problem. Ravelry introduced accessibility toggles, and eventually acknowledged that their initial response had been insufficient. By then, a lot of trust had been broken. Whatever you think about how the redesign was handled, the cultural effect is hard to ignore. Many Ravelry users scaled back their dependence on the site, maybe using it as a pattern database, but moving their more social online spaces to YouTube, Instagram, Discord, and smaller independent communities. Ravelry didn't disappear. It remains uniquely important as a pattern database and project tracker, but it stopped being the central place where all parts of the knitting internet came together. And when Rhinebeck returned to an in-person festival in 2021, the Ravelry meetup on the Hill did not return with it. I don't know the reason. It may be related to the redesign, it may be something totally unrelated. I don't want to draw a causal line I can't prove. But whatever the cause, Rhinebeck came back missing a piece of social infrastructure that brought knitters from all over the internet together. The need for that infrastructure didn't go away. In fact, post-pandemic, people were looking for a way to find each other and connect in person more than ever. At the same time, a different kind of tradition was growing. That tradition was Andrea Mowry's annual Rhinebeck Sweater design. Andrea, who designs under the name Drea Renee Knits, had already become one of the most influential knitwear designers before any of this began. Her 2016 shawl pattern, Find Your Fade, wasn't just successful. It was a phenomenon. Yarn stores couldn't get their hands on kits fast enough. Dyers were specially dyeing ombres and gradients specifically to cater to this pattern. Andrea's patterns helped make the fade one of the defining looks of that era in knitting. By 2018, Andrea had a large, dedicated following, a distinct design style, and established relationships with yarn companies. And that year, she released the Throwback, which would become the first of her Rhinebeck sweater designs. The next year, she designed Stonecrop, and that one came with a physical meetup at the festival. In 2020, when the physical festival shut down and moved online, Andrea's knit-along continued with the Throwover. You couldn't go to the fairgrounds, but you could still pick your yarn, cast on with everyone else, participate in all of the knit-along activities leading up to the date of the festival. For that one strange year, this was about the closest to Rhinebeck and to normalcy that a lot of people had. And when the physical festival returned in 2021, so too did Andrea's knit-along with Illuminate and another in-person meetup. So what made this particular tradition grow so much bigger and faster than other knit-alongs? Part of the answer is that Andrea belongs to a different generation of internet-famous designers. People like YSOLDA of the Knitty era definitely had fans, but they weren't so highly concentrated on an algorithm-driven site. Andrea became enormously successful in the Instagram era. You didn't just find her work when you were searching for a pattern on Ravelry. She would come across your feed. Maybe you followed her, or maybe the algorithm delivered her to you. Either way, when Andrea released a new pattern, it arrived in front of a large, established audience all at once. The previous generation of knitwear designers would wait for their patterns to trickle from blog to blog or to be discovered through Ravelry's search function, but for Andrea, the people most likely to make her patterns were already gathered all around her. And I don't think the difference here is that people started sharing their progress online, because going all the way back, people were blogging about what they were knitting. But the difference is concentration, and her designs are immensely knittable. Andrea has a clear, consistent style, and most of her patterns are achievable by an ambitious or advanced beginner while still maintaining a real visual impact, which is part of the appeal. She drops the Rhinebeck sweater pattern in the summer, giving people plenty of time to pick their yarn and knit their sweater before the event. And you don't need to arrive at the festival with a community in place. With earlier sweater rainbows, the group chose the project together, but with Andrea's knit-along, you could join the community by knitting the sweater. Plus, there's another layer to this that the earlier sweater rainbows didn't have. The person hosting it was a knitting celebrity. So the appeal isn't just in meeting the community that made the sweater, it's that you also might encounter Andrea. Maybe she will like or reshare one of your posts about the knitting process. Maybe you get to meet her at the festival and say hello, tell her how much her work means to you, take a picture together. For many knitters, that prospect is genuinely exciting. And Andrea has a reputation for being really kind and warm, for stopping to say hello and take a picture with you, whether or not you knit her sweater. But the parasocial element does slightly change the structure of the knit-along, because the rainbow sweaters grew horizontally out of an existing group, whereas Andrea's knit-along grows out of a central celebrity figure. People might join because of Andrea, but in the process, they find each other. And then you get 2 layers of recognition at once. The opportunity to meet the friends you made throughout the knit-along online, and then you get the opportunity to meet the celebrity designer who brought you all together. So when Rhinebeck returned in person in 2021, and Ravelry's meetup didn't return with it, Andrea's meetup had already grown to be a recognizable event at the festival. The Ravelry meetup had gathered the larger knitting world together for 1 hour without having to share a particular look. Andrea's meetup brought the knitting world together because they shared a particular look. Andrea's sweater made one community visible throughout the entire event. And there's a difference. Andrea's knit-along creates genuine belonging, and that matters a lot, especially to people who don't have an established friend group at the festival. But it creates a very specific type of community, and one with a visual boundary that the Ravelry meetup never had. When a large group of people are wearing the same recognizable sweater, you start to notice it, in line for apple cider donuts, and across a barn, and in the food building, and in the background of photo after photo, until you find yourself thinking, dang, I'm seeing a lot of that sweater this year. And that's exactly why the sweater works so well as a signal, but every signal that demonstrates who's in also demonstrates who's out. Of course, social circles and status existed far beyond this knit-along existed at Rhinebeck. There were designers who knew each other and traveled around in groups. From the outside, there were always parts of Rhinebeck that felt a little cliquey, but those groups weren't necessarily encoded in what you were wearing. This knit-along makes those differences visible in a way that nothing on the old hill really was. Now, you can show up to the DRK knit-along meetup without wearing the designated sweater, absolutely, and you can still be a part of the group picture and take a photo with Andrea, but you will still be visually separate and distinct from the group if you're not wearing the same thing as everyone else. Imagine the Rhinebeck of old as a music festival, think Warped Tour. Everyone is there because they love the music, and there are many stages throughout the day with lots of different music artists, and everyone's wearing different band shirts for different bands they like and wandering from stage to stage, listening to an old favorite or discovering someone new that they love. Now imagine that seemingly overnight, one of the participating artists achieves a Taylor Swift level of fame. Let's say it's Taylor Swift. Between one festival and the next, a huge portion of the audience becomes very invested in Taylor. They show up at the festival in Eras-inspired outfits, they wear their bracelets ready to meet and trade with other Swifties. They aren't all dressed identically, they've chosen different eras, different colors, but they're all visually identifiable as part of the same group. And they find each other and connect and find community. Now, the festival never declared Taylor the official act. They never made her a headliner. There are still plenty of other bands playing, and lots of people came to see them too. But the Swifties have become the festival's most visually coherent group. They don't have to constitute a literal majority to start to shape the way the festival looks and feels, and to start to influence a newcomer attending the festival to wonder, is this in some way a Taylor Swift event? If you've been attending Warped Tour for years because you love bouncing between stages, discovering new music to love, you might feel a little bit sad to see so much of the event's visual identity taken up by one fandom. That doesn't mean the Swifties don't belong there. Of course they do. Taylor is a musician, and this is a music festival. But a community organized around one artist is different than a community organized around the festival and all of the music within it. So when someone says they miss how visually diverse Rhinebeck used to be, and another person responds, well, the sweater gives people community, both things can be true. Neither one cancels out the other. The sweater does give people community, but Rhinebeck already had community long before this knit-along existed. The shared project wasn't one sweater, it was knitting itself. This sweater didn't create community where none existed. It made one fandom the most visible part of a much larger and varied knitting world. So visible that newcomers might mistake it for the whole. And once enough people were participating, the tradition began reinforcing itself, because the more people who wore it at the festival, the more recognizable it became. And the more recognizable it became, the more effective it was as a symbol of participation. And the more effective it was as a symbol of participation, the more people wanted to sign on to knit it the following year. And social media accelerates that loop, because one person might share their individual Rhinebeck sweater choice, it'll get shared and seen and liked. But if a huge amount of people start talking about and sharing and liking and hashtagging one specific project, that project will begin to be amplified by the algorithm. Recognizable things tend to do really well on social media. People are more likely to stop, comment, share, and like if they're seeing something that they recognize. Individual, unique Rhinebeck designs are being shared once or twice, but they're scattered across different hashtags and different keywords, whereas all of the DRK knit-along sweaters have the same hashtags, the same keywords, and they can be amplified in a group. This knit-along concentrates attention around one highly visible thing. So if you're new to knitting and you search Rhinebeck sweater, you don't find the festival's full range of handmade clothing in anything like equal proportion. You're disproportionately likely to encounter the most visible pattern at the festival. It would be easy to look at a crowd all wearing the same sweater from the outside and call it conformity. But from the inside of that group, it feels like the exact opposite. Think about what it must feel like to go to Rhinebeck for the first time, alone or with a friend. Tens of thousands of visitors, established vendors, 40 years of traditions. It's gotta feel intimidating. Now imagine walking in the same sweater that hundreds of other knitters have also made. It's a conversation starter. It makes you feel like you belong at this huge and overwhelming knitting event. And for people who can't attend Rhinebeck in person, Andrea's Knit-Along gives them a way to participate and to feel involved, to have a piece of the Rhinebeck experience, even if they can't attend the formal weekend. Some people might pick up skills they wouldn't have otherwise tried, like color work or saddle shoulders, because they feel like there's a group of supporters to help them through that new technique. From outside the group, you see version after version of the same sweater. But from inside the group, you see the colors that person chose, the section they had to rip out and start over twice, the friend who helped them fix their gauge, and all of the conversation and community that formed around knitting these sweaters together. And those experiences are individual, even if the sweater pattern is shared. From inside the knit-along, the word that actually fits isn't conformity, it's community. And I want to give Andrea credit for that, because she has uniquely created one event that brings so many knitters together to feel like they belong. She built an annual ritual around it, and she's put sustained, ongoing effort into making that ritual feel exciting and welcoming and engaging for everyone involved. Sure, it's marketing, it sells patterns, it sells yarn, everyone involved is running a business, but it's also community building, and both things can be true at once. I've watched versions of this conversation play out online, and the pattern is pretty predictable. Someone will express sadness for how different Rhinebeck feels, or nostalgia for the visual diversity the festival used to offer, and pretty quickly the responses will roll in. Why are you being a hater? You're dragging Andrea down or throwing shade. You must just be jealous. Why can't you stand to see a successful woman shine? I understand some of that defensiveness. Successful women are often scrutinized or torn down in ways that successful men aren't, and often at the hands of other women. And Andrea is sometimes blamed for changes in the knitting community that she is not responsible for. She didn't decentralize Ravelry as the hub of the knitting world online. She didn't end its Rhinebeck meetup, and she didn't invent the desire to belong. But there has to be room for more nuance than celebrating everything unquestionably or being labeled a hater for noticing that things have changed. We can celebrate everything that Andrea's built, notice the skill and sustained effort that it took, really believe that the community behind her is genuine and valuable, and at the same time feel nostalgic about the way that Rhinebeck used to feel. Noticing that something has changed is not the same thing as assigning blame. So what exactly did change? Well, one important shift happens months before anyone even arrives at Rhinebeck. The thought process used to be a few months before the festival, you'd start to think, what sweater am I going to make for Rhinebeck this year? And you would look through Ravelry, you would search your favorites, you would look through maybe some pattern books that you had to try and pick out a design, and then you would think about the yarn that you had, maybe a sweater quantity you bought at last year's festival, which yarn did you want to use and showcase. The October deadline was shared, but everyone began from a different starting point. But Andrea's knit along shifts that. Instead of knitters beginning with the question, what will I knit this year? They start with the question, what will Andrea design this year? They wait for the pattern release before committing to a project. And Andrea's pattern release comes with a lot. A yarn selection, a built-in community, helpful tutorials and videos, and the knowledge that if you work your way through and get the sweater done in time, you will have a group to participate in physically at the Rhinebeck Festival. Choosing a different pattern doesn't mean you have to do everything alone, but it does mean that you have to make a lot more decisions for yourself. What's the pattern going to be? Do you have enough time to make it before the deadline? Which yarn should you choose? If there is a community surrounding that pattern, you have to locate it yourself. Andrea's design comes with an unusually complete social structure attached to it that most other patterns just don't. And the structure is public. Andrea's pattern doesn't just give you a plan and a group, it makes your participation visible. Fashion works this way too. Every so often there's a bag or a pair of shoes that takes off. And nobody has to wear those things, but if you do, it signals to others in a visual way, I know what's going on, I know what's cool. Andrea is one of the most visible and influential knitting designers that there is today. So by wearing her sweater, you signal to others, I know what's cool. But unlike any other fashion trend, you can't just go to the mall and buy it. You have to start preparing months in advance to get the yarn, which sells out quickly, to knit the pattern, and to wear it on the designated date. By the time you wear it to Rhinebeck, it communicates that you participated in the entire season leading up to the event. None of that makes anyone's reasons for joining shallow. Many of the people who knit the sweater genuinely love the design and they like the style and would knit it whether or not it was part of a larger event. Because the sweater comes with an organized community and a highly visible measure of participation, it carries more social weight than any other pattern would. If you're new to Rhinebeck, you might not realize that you're seeing one designer's knit-along within a much larger, older, and more varied tradition. You just look around and see hundreds of the same sweater. One community's annual project can start to look like a festival tradition, leaving you wondering whether you missed something, like you were walking into a party where everyone else got the dress code and you missed the memo. And that's how knitters come to believe that there is an official Rhinebeck sweater. Nobody has to say it out loud. They just simply have to look around and see all these people wearing the same sweater and come to the conclusion, well, that must be what people mean when they talk about their Rhinebeck sweater. So where does that leave Rhinebeck? Well, I don't think we're ever going to get back to the Rhinebeck of 2013. Ravelry just isn't the central hub that it was anymore. The knitting world is still online, but it no longer passes through the same hub or empties onto the same hill at noon. Knitting does give everyone at Rhinebeck something in common, but people are still searching for ways to turn that into real interpersonal encounters. And Ravelry did that with the meetup on the hill, and Andrea does that with her knit-along. But if what we miss about the old Rhinebeck is that big, heterogeneous slop of a variety of patterns and designers and yarns and colors and styles, getting rid of Andrea's knit-along wouldn't make that world come back. What could help is making the festival's existing variety more visible and easier to find. For example, there's a stitch marker swap I have spotted on the hill for the last 3 years, and every year I wanted to participate and couldn't, because I could not find any information about what it was, how to participate, like where to find the information. Rhinebeck already has small communities and meetups happening throughout the weekend. It just lacks a clear, reliable, central place to find them. Maybe a public calendar of meetups and swaps posted early enough that people can actually plan around them and attend them, as opposed to seeing something cool across the hill and being like, hey, what's that? What is that over there? It might also benefit from one open gathering at a predictable place and time where anyone can come wearing anything. Without a central organization bringing the wider community together, the gathering organized by the person with the biggest following will naturally become the most visible, even if it only represents a small segment of Rhinebeck. The goal isn't to make that community less visible.
It's to make the larger knitting community surrounding it easier to see. I want a person who knits Andrea's sweater to walk onto the fairgrounds, see version after version of that design, and immediately feel like a part of a community. But I also want Rhinebeck to remain visually exciting, a place where someone can wear an old cardigan or a crochet dress or a vintage pattern or their own design and have someone come up to them and stop them in a barn and say, "Oh my goodness, what are you wearing?" These aren't two competing visions of Rhinebeck. They're both just Rhinebeck.
Let's go back to that Halloween town. A street full of Spider-Men doesn't ruin Halloween. It means a whole group of people found something they loved, they chose to work toward it together, and they found each other through it. That could actually make the whole night. But when one coordinated group costume becomes the visual center of the parade, something does change. You'll still see that homemade dinosaur or a cardboard washing machine or a sheet ghost with holes cut out for eyes. But instead of encountering a new idea every few feet, you start to see the same thing repeated over and over again. And that's the tricky part. No individual Spider-Man costume is to blame. They probably genuinely loved the costume and love being a part of the get-together. You can appreciate their joy and still miss the surprise and delight of seeing a totally different costume on every single person. I don't want to tell anybody what to make. If I ask you, what are you knitting for Rhinebeck this year? And you tell me Andrea's design, I will be so happy for you. You should make it and enjoy the community that comes with it. It's one option. It just isn't the option. Rhinebeck's visual variety survives when knitters continue to choose different things to knit for the festival. An obscure pattern, a different designer's new release, even something that you designed yourself. Any of those can be your Rhinebeck sweater, because there isn't one official Rhinebeck sweater, and there never was. If you're planning to attend Rhinebeck this year and you're knitting something special, let me know what pattern you chose in the comments. I would love to hear what you're working on and know which patterns to keep my eyes peeled for as I walk around the fairgrounds. And if you enjoyed this video, you can like and subscribe. It's a great way to let me know you enjoyed it. About 80% of my regular viewers are actually not subscribed, and it's the best way to make sure you don't miss my next upload. You can also find me in between videos on TikTok and Instagram, and if you'd like, you can support the channel on Patreon. And if you liked this video, YouTube seems to think you'll like this one too, so you can check that out next. As always, it's been so wonderful to talk about knitting with you today, and I can't wait to see you in the next one. Bye.